Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome back to Bucket Code. So in the last few videos, I'm just laying down the base foundation of Java. We did hello world, then we did this user input, and then I talked to you about the if-else statements and the if-else statements, if all that. Now we're gonna go and dive into the for loop. And this is how I usually start my codes. I like to write the skeleton model of the class, the public main method, and then I like to print out Bismillah just to make sure that everything's working. Like a good little check. Now, the skeleton model of the for loop is this right here. And what it is we have the for loop, which is the keyword for, and then we have the condition, which is a variable we create, the condition, and then the amount of iteration we'll do. So it's going to be the variable, it's going to be the condition, and then the iteration. So as long as that condition is true, that boolean is true, the for loop will continuously execute. Well, I can sit here and say system.out.print line and say subhanallah, right? So we'll print out subhanallah one time. And let's say we want to have a lot of ajr. We can just go in here and say system.out.print line. If I learn how to spell print line, and I can write it again, subhanallah. Okay? And I can just copy this and paste it. And paste it and paste it and paste it all the way for as long as I wanted to. Or it'll take up too much space for the system. It will understand, but it'll just take up too much space. So what programming allows us to do is to make our lives easier. Now instead of doing that, we can just go into our for loop and we can say we want to print it out, let's say 10 times. We'll set this up like this. So we'll have our iterator, which is I, int I, and we'll set that to 0. And while I is less than 10, we want to increase I. So what this is saying is we have three parts to this for loop. We have our iterator, which is integer I, we've declared it. We can name it whatever we want. We can say whatever we want, and we can also make this start at any number. Then we have our condition. As long as I is less than 10, execute whatever's inside of this if statement. Execute code. And after it completes one execution, we want to increase our I value. So int I will start off at 0. Is I less than 10? If that's true, iterate the code, then check. Increase I by 1. I plus plus is basically saying that I, you can also write like this, I equals I plus 1. But instead of writing this over and over, you can just type in plus plus. So now we know how the for loop works. We have the iterator, the condition, and then the iterator number. Inside of this for loop, we'll write the same thing. System dot out dot print line subhanallah. Now if I print this out, it should print out 10 times. So I'm going to go ahead and say Java C compile for loop dot Java. If there's no issues, it should print it. So now Java for loop. And as you can see, it printed out 10 times. And another cool thing that I can tell you is we can also do this. This iteration is, and we can say I. And what we're doing is we are taking I from within its scope. So anything that's going to be inside of these curly brackets is going to be considered the scope. So inside of the for loop I, or the for loop, we can access I. But the moment we come outside of the for loop and say system.out.print line I, we have an error. What we're looking at is it's saying it cannot be resolved to a variable. If we were to make I a global variable, then it would be accessible throughout the entire code. And that would be a static variable. But since we're working with just the for loop right now, we'll focus on that. So we have our for int I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. We're going to say system print out, this iteration is I, and every time I increases, so should this I right here. And if we print this out, it should print out 0 to 9. So if I compile it again, and now I say that, we can see 0 to 9. And let's change this up. Let's actually do 10, and let's say I minus minus, which is an alternate way of doing it. And while I is greater than 0. So int I equals 0. As long as I is greater than 0, we're going to subtract 1 from I. Now we're going to see the reverse. So compile it, for loop. Now we can see it goes from 10 to 1. The reason it started at 10 this time instead of 0 is because I told I to start at 10. See how there's no 0 now. If I were to say greater than or equal to, and I were to run it again, now you can see that 0 is added. However, be very careful that we no longer have 10 iterations. We now have 11 iterations because we are including our conditional statement. So be very careful when you do that. And that is basically the for loop. If you have any questions, as always, leave a comment below. And assalamu alaikum.